There we go. All righty. So I am really delighted to be here with Colby Sharma and to talk about his book, The Curveball: Story of Grit, Adversity, and Winning the Game of Life. And I love the fact that you've got that as your title. I admit, and I think I've already said this to you, Colby, when you first showed me the book and shared the book with me, I thought, I don't know a thing about baseball. Am I going to get this? You don't need to know about baseball to understand and to get the book. It's so well done. So I'm really, really happy to be here to be sharing this book with others. And for those who might be new to the Career Conversations Book Club, just a very brief background. My name is Gina Alexandris. I am a legal career coach. And the idea of the book club really came about because of three things that I love: books and reading, powerful career conversations, and bringing people together in a community. And so that created this Career Conversations book club where we bring in authors that are talking about books related to our careers and how we could prosper within our careers. But they typically also include things about how we prosper in our own life, personally as well as professionally. If you'd like, feel free to post your thoughts and any social media contact on hashtag GA Career Conversations. We'll soon hear from Colby in a little bit, who I'm thrilled to have join us today. But just a few quick points, especially for those who might be joining us for the very first time. Format for tonight: we spend a few minutes at the very beginning introducing Colby and his background and his experiences. We'll then take a deeper dive into some questions that I have prepared for Colby about the book, and then we're going to open it up to you. So feel free to think about your comments and your questions as we're going through. And in the last little while, we're going to open it up to all of you for joining us. Please keep your microphones muted until the final 30 minutes of the Q&A, and then we'll open it up and we'll ask for hands up, and you can join us in the conversation. The other thing that I wanted to say is that we are recording the session, so please be aware of that. We do post it on YouTube afterwards as well. For any Ontario lawyers out there now or who are watching this in the recorded version, this is eligible for 1.5 hours of professionalism credit. So you can access your CPD credits from the Law Society. And one last thing before we move forward. We've talked in the past about brave and powerful conversations, and brave and powerful conversations are definitely important, respecting each other in the process. The one thing that I've learned from one woman, Elisa Hancora, who has really made an impact on me, is that sometimes for some people, brave spaces are exhausting. And for that reason, I'm using her language and her suggestions about creating accountable spaces. In accountable spaces, we're each responsible for ourselves, our intentions, our words, and our actions. It means that when we enter a space with good intentions, we also understand and align ourselves with the intent of that action. And that's the true test of our commitment. So to that end, I am adhering to the accountable space guidelines that I've circulated through emails, which all of you would have had when you registered for today. I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see more of Colby. I want to see more of others who are here. Hello to everybody. Christina, good to see you again. Not meaning to point you out, but hello again. And we're going to get started. So Colby, welcome. As I mentioned when you and I were speaking, the last time you and I saw each other in person was right before the world shut down. It was literally March the 11th at an OBA event, Ontario Bar Association event, that was live. And we were not sure if it was actually going to happen, but it did happen. And then 2 or 3 days later, everything else that we know about happened. So it's really great to see you. And thank you for joining us this way.
Christina. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to bring some strong value to your audiences, to help them on their career journeys, to help them master and deal with this accelerated change that is still going through our lives in so many ways. So I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, what I ask for each of our authors, because we know that you are an author, but share with the group what the rest of your career journey is like. We know that you're an author and that is where you're at right now, but tell us a little bit about the personal highlights of your career journey and how did you start each? How did you finish them? How did you know it was time to pivot? So this is a
Well,
career conversation, so let's go with that.
before we kind of get into the meat of the thing, I like to just add, as part of also, I'm a resilience expert. I deal with corporations, organizations to help their leaders, their team members become more resilient, boost well-being, and create a high-performing team culture. And that's something I've done since the onset of the pandemic.
Fantastic. And that's so important. We hear that word bantered around sometimes, resilience, and we throw it off as if it's just the new catchword, but we're going to get into what resilience really means at this point. What else can you tell us a little bit about your career to date? How did you become an author? Why did you become an author? And what were you doing before that time?
Yeah, so I mean, my career journey has been a series of beautiful moments that has created a symphony of incredible learning experiences that I'm very grateful to have been a part of. I did work in law. I was in the lawyer licensing process, and I did work at a solicitor firm. However, I saw myself in a completely different way, and I think they saw my abilities also in a different way. I'll give you an example. So I brought a client into the firm on my third day on the job, and I was told by my boss, the managing partner, I'm not paying you to bring in business. I'm paying you to be a trainee.
Oh,
Please go be a trainee. And I share this a lot in my talks and in my speeches for organizations. We are trained, and the old adage is to go above and beyond, to push the envelope. As lawyers, obviously, we're very prone to be hard charging, high pressured individuals, whether we're litigators or solicitors. But you reach a point where it's the in the box versus the out of the box conundrum, and it's about get really honing into that inner knowledge within and saying, where do I actually see myself? So fast forward to the pandemic, I released my book called The Curveball, which I actually wrote when I was a law student back in 2016. I spent my summers writing the book, and then pandemic hit, and I really thought, what better time to publish the book when we're dealing with curveballs, when we're dealing with these unexpected situations in our lives, which is really what the book actually is about. And as the book goes around the world, it was released in Spanish in worldwide March 2024. It's about, this is a book to help you with life's unexpected challenges, personally or professionally, and really how to deal with them in a way that's proactive as so as to react.
uh, unexpected challenges. The one that sort of saw you publish at that time was certainly something unexpected, but there's so many unexpected challenges all the time, and we'll come to that. I love the comment that you made, Colby, and not everybody on this caller who will be watching is necessarily in law. There are others who are in other areas or in other industries, but the fact that you said in the box versus out of the box thinking. There's such comfort sometimes, or perceived comfort, in staying in the box. Or some people feel comfort in staying in the box. But boy, can that sometimes limit us, right? What's your thought about saying, why'd you say that?
That's absolutely right, Gina. It's I believe the phrase is confirmation bias. Oh,
Mhm.
let's get these focus groups out because we want, like, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the needs is before self-actualization, really feeling a sense of community. Community precedes self-actualization, because how can you self-actualize if you don't know what's around you, who is around you? So you want to make sure your circle is really tight, and that is one of the lessons in the book that we're going to get into. But I think shedding confirmation bias in a way that is inhibiting you is very detrimental to building a flourishing, thriving career in law or whatever else you choose to do.
Absolutely. There's so much going on in my head right now about that comment about shedding confirmation bias. But let's move on. We're going to talk a lot about this as we dig into the book. But one other question that I ask each and every author, because many people, I'm a career coach, and we talk about planning and being organized and having career goals. But I also leave space and encourage people to leave space for serendipity. It's one of my favorite words, and it's also one of my favorite concepts. And I wonder if you could share with us how much of your career, if any, would you say was planned strategically and how much of it really was serendipitous, chance occurrences?
Hmm. You know, I want to say I think it's serendipitous as per the outcome, but it wasn't serendipitous before that. There was still a logical structure. Like I worked for the Bank of Nova Scotia as a senior financial advisor, but Bank of Nova Scotia was my first ever keynote as an organizational level. So
Mhm.
talk about serendipitous. And I just think that's a brilliant example of serendipity. Fast forward 5 years after leaving the bank. I mean, serendipitous. I mean, I'm very grateful. My father is also an author. He's a tremendous inspiration, tremendous mentor of mine, and and he absolutely encouraged me to to write the book as I saw fit based on my own life's experiences. And I mean, he was also a lawyer himself. So to what extent that is serendipitous, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, incredibly grateful to have all of these experiences that have just given me so much examples to draw from when it coming to keynotes, to workshops, to writing. It just created a breadth of harmonious experiences that I'm just trying to draw and bring in every single chance I get.
Yeah, it's funny because when you and I first met, again, serendipitous, I have read your dad's materials, and then here you and I started chatting, not realizing that you were an author, not realizing what your background was. I knew that you were there for law, and that for me was quite serendipitous because your dad's books have had quite an impact on me, and then to see sort of that next generation in a new way doing it himself has been phenomenal. So you're right that those chance encounters. I love the example of RBC was your first job, but then
Scotia,
unplanned. But sorry,
Scotia,
sorry,
incident.
my apologies, Scotia. We'll get RBC in there at some point. Scotia Bank was the first job, right? But then you come back years later, unplanned, but you're in a new role, and boom, there's a connection there. Let's let's get into the book. Colby,
Yeah.
I wonder, you said that you wrote the book while you were a law student in the summer. Not everybody writes a book during their summers between law school. Um, what's the why? It takes time and energy and commitment to write a book, any book, to give yourself of this. Every author I asked has some kind of a why. What was your why that you wanted to get this book out into the world?
Walk or there is no path. You
Mm,
have to come to that realization that, you're either in it or you're not in it. For me to write the curveball was based on my own life's adversities that had really were before professional school, before law school, and before jobs, and before all of these great experiences. But I learned differently when I was a teenager. And that was my why. That was my crystallization that this is my unexpected journey. I didn't know that would be part of my life, but it's profoundly changed my life. It's showed me the beautiful as examples of neuroplasticity and resilience and truly having to come to grips with something that we hear all these things, neurodiversity, and it's a great concept, but we have to be careful. Like, it can also be stigmatizing in a way. And I'm here to share with people that, that is your superpower. Resilience is your superpower, and neuroplasticity and neurodiversity are also your superpowers as well. You know, I still remember that. And, I did a talk for that school as well.
mhm.
But that moment profoundly changed my life. It gave me the why to write the curveball as opposed to the how. The how is easy, whether you want to write it on paper or computer. But that emotional why, who is that first reader? You have to be crystal clear emotionally and have that really clear vision in your mind. This is who I want to write for, and then the rest of the world. And that's what I really sought to do.
It's interesting because what I'm hearing from you is that your why is really etched in personal experience and personal struggles, and then being able to sort of see what you can make from it and how you move forward. So it really is a private and personal sharing, and being able to take that forward. I have to say, you mentioned neurodiversity. Many people within the legal profession, many people within industries, broadly speaking, are only starting to come to terms and understand and appreciate. You called neurodiversity a superpower, and you said, I learned differently in high school. And that was something that was probably not easy for you to do in high school. There are more and more people talking about it these days. Sorry,
This was before high school. So I
before
want
high school.
to, yes, yes, before high school. So this was elementary school, '06.
Wow. So again, it's been something that you have lived with and have engaged with for a long time. I, a lot of people, and you probably know this, get diagnosis with neurodiverse issues later on, much later on as adults. And there's a coming to grips with it and thinking, oh boy, am I somehow going to be able to overcome this? It can be overwhelming. We'll talk about overwhelm later. So the fact that your why is really based on that personal experience that you have, I think is of tremendous benefit to you and to everybody else that reads this book.
I think also you touched on a great point. Like, sometimes I think why we put the mask on, we're going to get into that maybe as well, but we have the mask, we have that denial on, we
Mhm.
say, I just want to just go to work, don't bother me, because we have such trouble and that angst to come to grips with, you know, that deep side of ourselves.
Mhm.
Freud calls it the shadow self.
Mhm.
And the shadow self contains our life's meanings, though. And it's easier to maybe, yes, to some extent, to be, I don't want to use this word diagnose, because I think it's also some kind of a pejorative term,
Mhm.
but I can see where that can come from. But it's easier to find you're able to get to grips with these challenges earlier rather than later. Because when we're kids, when we're, in elementary school, we have so few needs.
Mhm.
We have so few needs. We just want to be cared, hugged, loved. And then we get to the vices, and we get to the jagged edges of our adolescence, of our career journeys, who we have to be and what we must become. But we don't have those pressures as kids.
Yeah. Yeah. To go back and be your 5-year-old self again, I think all of us need to take a step back in time and think about who she or he was at that point. Um, One of the things that I love about the book, before we go into the specific commentaries, is how you wrote it. And I've got to ask you about that, because you open with someone who feels there's something wrong with him, there that he feels that he's not good enough, or that there's something wrong. And he's told by a special person that, in fact, he actually knows what to do. He just has to remember how to deal with adversity, because, we've all dealt with it before. Why did you choose to write this book in the way that you did, with a story about Bryce Hall? Am I saying it correctly? Bryce Holloway? Is that how you
Yeah.
say his name? I just want to make sure. Bryce Holloway, rather than sort of your own personal reflection or an advice book. Why did you decide to do it as an example through a story, through a separate person?
Well, I think humans, we learn much better. And, if we go through Aesop's fables, if we go through so much of the literature, stories are how we build community. Stories
Mhm.
are how we actually get to life's true essence and true meaning, though. So, to your question, why did it not write it in a prototypical self-help style? I think it's boring. I honestly say it'd be tapped out. I'd say it's refreshing, you know, to write it in a fiction way. I mean, I love fiction books, much the same as I love nonfiction books, but I wanted to write it in a way that was true to me.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it worked. And before we get into do you love baseball? Is that why you chose baseball as the background, or did it just happen to lend itself, the curveball, to the
Yeah,
thinking?
yeah. I mean, well, I do love baseball, absolutely, as much as I love, football much as I love basketball. However, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to kind of stress this because this was 2020, we're in 2024. So as the book makes its way in the international markets, India, Spain, EU, I want to shift the messaging that this is not a baseball book.
Mhm.
This is a book to help you live your
Yep.
best life and overcome life's inevitable challenges, whoever you might find.
I love it. So let's get into it then. Let's talk about some of the rules. And for anybody who has not read it, we're going to use a name, Spooky. Maybe I'll let Colby tell us who Spooky is and why he comes up. You remind us, and he reminds us that in law and life, there's always adversity, and that it can be pretty overwhelming sometimes. I know I talk to a lot of my clients who feel really overwhelmed by the changes and the adversity and the challenges that come up in life. And we're going to look into Spooky's rules and tell us what they mean. And we're going to start with one base at a time. So, who's Spooky and what on earth does he mean by one base at a time?
Spooky is a wonderful mentor that Bryce, in a moment of personal and professional challenges, encounters on a serendipitous, night out one night on the bleachers. And Spooky is an amalgamation of advices, mentors that I've had in my own life that I sought to bring into the character. I think we have proximate mentors and we have non-proximate mentors. We have mentors that are fleeting. We might meet them once, but that they spark something very deep within us that catalyzes some change. Or we have people we see on a daily basis that could also have a powerful impact, but we have to decide who we want to take advice from.
I love Spooky, yeah, and the fact that he's that amalgamation of all of those sort of mentors and advice givers to you, I think is really incredible. And you're right, some people touch us for a minute and have a profound impact, and others are in our lives for a long time and have that long-term impact. So one base at a time. What does Spooky mean when you say to when you write one base at a time? Take us
When
through
you're
that.
dealing with adversity personally, professionally, I'm going to use professionally more so because we spend most of our lives at work, and we your audience, we're always dealing with billables, billable hours, and other demands. So, what is the smallest action you can take to beat the adversity that you're facing? How can you take the challenge that is might seem so enormous up here, but you distill it down? What small actions can you take to get to where you want to go? If you're looking for a job, how can you retool your resume? Who can you meet in the next quarter, in the next week? How many coffee chats can you take? From my personal experiences, I've had many, many coffee chats up and down Bay Street, up and down Wellington. Gina, you and me, I've had so much of that. But all those actions are part and parcel of the process. So keep sweating the process. And remember, what is the simple actions that will catalyze the greatest change in the future?
And it's tough because in this instance, Bryce, he knows what to do, but it's that getting started. So when Spooky says one base at a time, you forget that when you're the one who's overwhelmed in those moments of overwhelmed or weeks or months of overwhelmed, you need to move forward, and sometimes you forget how to do it. Right. So how do you break it down? What do you think is the need for us to, how do you break it down individually when you're feeling overwhelmed?
Well, the first thing I would suggest to do, and I talk a lot about this as well, is much like an athlete has taken so many thousands of shots to get to taking a shot in the championship, as lawyers and wherever you may work, you've been through adversity so often in your life to get to this moment. College, undergrad, whether you do a master's or not to do a master's, you've been at adversity. You faced adversity. You faced rejection. You faced failure. You faced the blessing of failure. And I know that's might seem a counterintuitive conception for lawyers and for people who stress being at the very top. No, there's no one that can get to me. I can't possibly have failed. Yes, you have also failed, but that has given you the pathway to get to your wins.
Yeah.
So it's remembering that. It's acknowledging that, you can take that smallest steps to get to where you want to go. Life is not just the perfection at the end, it's the smallest steps and the blessing that those steps carry within us.
Yeah.
From my own personal experience, the people I met became my greatest connections today. They became my friends today. So I've not regretted a single step in the process because the people I met have given me so much to be thankful for and to have such great perspective so many years down the line.
And it's interesting because I think one of the things that you say as you talk about one base at a time, we may not be able to see the full picture when we're in that stage of fog or uncertainty. We may not be able to see the end result, right? But being able to, I had a really dear friend who, when she was in a very low stage, she used a phrase which I keep coming back to repeatedly, and I've shared with many of my clients, which was just put one foot in front of the other every single day. Sometimes that is the best that you can do. Just put one foot in front of the other and you'll then remember how to walk and you'll remember how to run a little bit and then you'll remember how to run as fast as you need to do. But when you can't see the end, the biggest step and the hardest step sometimes is just taking that first step, right?
Even before we get to like the concrete steps, I think so many people sweat. There's a lot of sweat equity built into concrete steps.
Hmm.
Before you get to that, just breathe. Just breathe. Maybe write a letter to yourself and that says, here's what I'm proud of. It might not get me the job. It might not get me the interview. It might not get me to the second stage. It's okay because I'm worthy of being in this process. I'm lucky to be in this process. And one of the things that I suggest in my work is I say burn it. Burning of the letter has a powerful psychological impact because it sheds those negative feelings and it sheds in a very visceral way that bondage to self and that bondage to many aspects of self, whether it's shame, guilt, providence, whether it's reflection, whether it's, avarice, whether it's so many emotions.
One of the things you've just hit on right now before we go on to the next rule, you talked about a number of emotions that people who are um, type A personalities, I'll use that phrase, right? Very high achieving potentially. You've talked about guilt and shame. And you earlier, I loved how you phrased it as the blessing of failure. Um, whether it's societal, whether it's professional, whether it's the people that you engage with, that shame and that guilt can really be a struggle sometimes. And we're not psychologists here, we're not therapists here, but being able to move forward in spite of the shame and the guilt, or maybe working with that. Speak a little bit more about that, the guilt and the shame that you referenced earlier, and how you're able to overcome that.
Well, I mean, those are, deep seated human emotions. And I don't think in professional settings,
Hmm.
I don't think we have got the widespread emotional language to really come to terms
Yeah.
with that. But the reality is, and there's a beautiful book I read in high school called Becoming Human. And yeah, so the first chapter was grade 9, second chapter, grade 10, third chapter, grade 11, fourth chapter, grade 12.
Oh,
And those, and it's going to this point that those are human emotions. And we are all human having human experiences, though, whether it's someone in your firm or in your circle, in your community, in your society who's dealing with something, try to be a friend to them, build a bridge and not building a barrier. And I think so often when we're in this pursuit of perfection, barriers rise up. You look at a law firm, there's so many silos. The offices used to be in silos. I think it's Tetro, McCarthy Tetro, that has this beautiful new office, and that's without silos. I'm like, wow, that's fantastic.
yeah.
you know, and I think, we're in this time post pandemic, and there was a great report by former Chief Justice Strathy,
Hmm.
Ontario Court of Appeal, on the mental health aspect in the profession. And I think bridges, not barriers, are important. Being a true friend to someone in an interview process, asking people what I suggest to do in my work: where have you come from? What adversities are you proud to have overcome? It's not just, what's your credentials to get to the job, to get to this point. No, I want to get to know you at a very holistic level.
Yeah, and we see that happening, but it's a big ship to change in the legal profession, and I think it's happening again in steps at a time, one base at a time.
It's
I,
evolution. It can't just be revolution.
no, absolutely, absolutely. I love the fact that in your high school you read a book, a chapter, a bit at a time in grade 9, 10, 11, 12 about becoming human. I've got to look that up. If anybody has it available to put in the chat, I'd love to see to learn more about it. So I'm going to be looking that up. Have you ever gone back to look at that book again? I'm just curious. Have you ever referred back to it since high school? Because you remember it, so it had an impact.
No, I've never
Okay,
actually read it since then. No, but lived experience.
absolutely.
I can
Love it.
draw on that in a very beautiful way. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's go on to the second rule because at page 58 of the book, Bryce, who's our main
Love how you
character.
tabbed it. Very nice. Very nice.
Yes, I have tabbed it. Sorry, I'm a geek that way. I tab my books. Yes. On page 58, you
Almost looks
say,
like a litigator's bundle.
no, no, it's just a curiosity and a creative way of me figuring things out. On page 58, Bryce tells us that he's forgotten how it feels simply to work his way around the bases. And he asks himself, when did I get so addicted to the home run? Again, that end result, that goal, the final victory. Huge question that comes up for new and senior lawyers and for people in any career stage. I saw a post as an aside today on LinkedIn by somebody who says she didn't get a an award that she had been nominated for, and she is asking and she questions. She says that that external validation. If I never get an award again, will I be okay with that? Because it kind of hurt at that time. And here in this instance, when Bryce is saying, I'm addicted to that final home run, to that final goal. Um, and I don't know how I forgot to just go around the bases. The advice that Spooky comes up with is his next rule: choose your pitches. What do you mean by choose your pitches, and how does it apply in our professional life, Colby?
What I mean by that is choose what you want to tackle, in what order you want to tackle it, because we can't tackle all of our life's adversities at one time. We can't, work several different files at any given time. That would be detrimental to our clients. That would be detrimental, as lawyers, as officers of the court. We can't afford to do that. There's so much at stake. We have to be deliberate. We have to be methodical on the adversities we want to engage in, and we have to be okay with that. So I think it's getting to terms with, this is an evolutionary process. Becoming resilient, dealing with adversity is all about evolutionary steps, not revolutionary steps.
You say that you've said that a couple of times.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Evolution, not revolution.
Yeah, it's okay to go by evolution. Go small steps at a time.
Mhm.
Small steps at a time. How does any change occur? It starts by desire, discipline, and then action.
It's interesting because somebody said to me, small steps are good, but we opened up with the pandemic. I don't want to spend a lot of time with pandemic, but there was one example where all of a sudden big changes happened right away because there was a desire for it. You need to continue with life, and so Zoom became the way that people dealt with it. But short of pandemic, choosing your adversity or choosing the challenge, and I think it reminds us that there are many challenges in our lives at any given time. There are many beautiful things and many successes, but there's also many challenges. But we won't be able to what we shouldn't be required to try and deal with all of them at the same time. That's a good reminder. Whoa,
It is because
why is that important?
you're sold a societal belief of the home run, to use the words in the book. We're sold a belief that one quick pill will fix everything. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if you look at any, I don't know how much of the audiences are litigators, but how long does a trial take? There's so many things that go into a trial and the trial process, though. But it's about becoming deliberate once more and not forgetting that deliberateness is how we actually can get to see a clearer pathway to the end result and to shift that perspective. It ultimately it's a perspective and it is a mindset shift.
Mm-hmm. That's hard, right? So before I shifting perspectives is really hard, and it takes some self-awareness, it takes some talking, it takes some work to be able to, especially if you've been ingrained in a perspective, this is hard, I cannot do it, I'm not going to go anywhere. If you've been in that for a long time in particular, that's hard to get over, right? And yes, you take it one base at a time, but it's not easy work that we're talking about here.
Just coming on to this point, I remember my own process. The licensing candidate for internationally trained lawyers. I don't know what percentage of the audience are ITLs, but for anyone who's an ITL, so fellow ITL speaking proudly, member of the ITL community. Shout out to any ITLs.
I see some
It
people.
is the most challenging of all the challenging processes that the LSO licensing process throws at you.
Mhm.
What to do, what not to do. I can't recall how much time we spent. When should I do this? How should I file that? What stage is this? What stage is that? Like, it is so overwhelming. But just take a step back. You owe it to yourself to take that step back, to get out of the hamster wheel thinking over and over again. You're okay in this moment.
That idea to breathe, which is what you said earlier, just take a breath, take a step back, and know that you're okay in this moment is a reminder that many of us sometimes need when we're dealing with adversity. Um, Part of that stepping back, breathing, comes in that third rule, and I just want to get to that. Page 74, and again, something that Bryce thinks, or that you write Bryce's words, and so many professionals, students, lawyers, anybody working has felt this way many times. The pressure, so much pressure. I read those words and I'd gone back. I'd read this like 3 years ago and I went back and read it. And that phrase, because you've got it sort of italicized, the
Mm.
pressure, so much pressure. And it's a phrase that I hear frequently from clients, from students, from family and friends. Like there's always going to be pressure. And this leads to Spooky's third rule, remember your rituals. So we all are feeling pressures, but his recommendation is to remember the rituals. What do you mean by remember the rituals? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between rituals and then routines,
Hmm.
right? Rituals are those deep-seated practices that you inculcate to get to your highest version of yourself. It's why soccer players they tug at their cleats or they fix their sock before taking a penalty a penalty kick. That is a ritual. It's happened so many times over their careers. What I want to share with the audience though is we all have rituals. We all have that ability to have those deep community practices. One of them could be 6 a.m. morning cup of coffee. One of them could be a jog down Toronto's waterfront, wherever you may be in Toronto. One of them could be talking with friends every single day. I talk with my friends every single day. Those are all rituals. Do they have to be specific? They can be, or they can't, or they could be more general, but it's what works for you. One of the things I suggest to do in my organizational work is, we have to get better at doing organizational rituals. So, so like I mentioned before, when you want to get to know a new team member, when I was at the Bank of Nova Scotia, it was my first time ever working in financial services. So I was the new kid on the block. I had to ask people for advice a lot. They took me out for Tim Hortons. They sat me down. They really made it a welcoming experience for me. So we can become better at embedding rituals in our organizations, though. And that will yield to greater productivity. That will yield to we're all in this together because a rising tide lifts all boats. To the point on remembering our rituals, well, it's getting to that sense that we don't have to do this anew. It's not so much about doing a new ritual. We can go back to what worked for us in the past. If sitting down at your favorite restaurant, reading a book, or having a Starbucks at Chapters is your ritual, great. But do that though. Do that 10 times if that was a good memory for you. If you know, there's memories that are fleeting and there's memories that are actually the building blocks of our experiences though. Because of what we have it we have to go back into, you know, that time in the when the time where we felt safe again. It's about psychological safety. It's about tapping into that emotion that will yield the greatest results.
There's a couple of things here that I want to ask you about. Because you mentioned organizations, and I know there are some people on the call who work with organizations and are in sort of human resources or other related areas, but you talk about rituals in organizations and how important it is for them, whether we call them onboarding rituals, whether we call them team building rituals. That's sort of what creates a culture. And oftentimes, I know I've spoken with some clients where the culture in an organization is just broken, right? People who are in leadership roles, perhaps, or others, and I don't know where the break comes from, don't take the time to ensure that these rituals, these occurrences happen, and that impacts everyone within an organization. So what you're talking about isn't just an individual thing, it's organizational too.
It absolutely is. We have to come to terms with like these are organizations in 2024. This is not 2019 thinking. Ditch everything 2019. What worked for you
Mhm.
then worked fantastic. But we have to do rituals in 2024. It's about reinverting the script, reinventing the script of how we onboard. Whether we want to focus, you know, some portion of the week to holistic exercises that boost morale outside the office, whatever that might be, great. Whether might want to sit down with people, I think if you actually want to get to know people, you want to get to know truly who they are, which adversities that they overcame, because that will actually show them when they face adversity on the job, they already have that mental toolkit within to get the job done though, because they've been dealing with adversity for so long and so many situations previously in their lives.
There has to be an openness, Colby, right?
Yeah.
On leadership to embrace this. And even when you said get to know your people, there are organizations across the globe that do that really, really well. And then there are organizations that appear not to care to do it at all, right? And are leaving their team members scrambling and feeling really like they don't matter, I think, and that nobody needs to know what I'm going through or the adversities that I've had. They don't care. They just want me to get the job done. If you can speak to leaders in organizations about this whole concept of getting to know your people, why
Yeah.
is it important?
Because the people are your lifeblood of your business. I mean, they will be your lifeblood 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line, 100 years down the line. I mean, look at all, the biggest organizations, they know that this is mission critical.
Mhm.
So whether you want to have before you get into your job your own personal mission statement, this is what I want to do for the organization to help me bring them to their best. I would certainly suggest to do that because that will show you how you can take the challenges of the next quarter, the next month, the next year, the next 10 years, but you want to show accountability, radical accountability to yourself.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and we've got Gerline adding in terms of rituals, and I appreciate it, Gerline. I have a morning and night ritual. In morning, I drink my cup of herbal tea with calming music, looking at the sunlight, and hopefully you can see sunlight even in some of the Toronto weather that we have, or at least you can see it. You will find it no matter what. And before you sleep, you listen to follow guided meditation to sleep sound. I love that. It reminded me that when we don't have
I'm from Vancouver.
okay, from Vancouver. So
British Columbia, British weather.
yeah, exactly. So you see the sun sometimes. It reminded me, one of my evening rituals, my sister and I don't live that far away, but we don't see each other very often. And so we have we're between 8 and 9 or 9:30, we have a phone call. It might be 5 minutes, it might be half an hour, but it's almost every night. And when she's traveling or I'm traveling and our time zones are off, it throws us off. And each of our partners actually, if 10 o'clock has happened and we haven't had, they'll each say, have you actually called? Like, have you connected with? I haven't heard you yapping away with your sister. That's sort of a need. It feels like the day is complete when I have my touch base with my sister. And I also realized another ritual, and I'd love to hear what other people's rituals on a professional basis. I know a lot of people will just start right in on the agenda, right? We're here to talk about one, two, and three. I cannot in a meeting go right into and maybe it's cultural, maybe it's just the way that I've learned. I always need to have a few minutes where I open it up and just ask the person, how are you? Or the people, right? How's it going? Anything that we need to think about? I think being able to have that space for a few seconds before you get down to business. I didn't think about it as a ritual, Colby, but it is a very important ritual in how I have managed meetings, and for the most part, it's worked. I'm curious if that would drive people crazy, or if if they just want to get straight to business, or if that ritual would be something that would support them.
We have to have a new formulation and understanding of, before we get into the hard business. I know so many people might be on the call, might be, all this stuff might be not hard business, but, soft business is hard business though.
Bingo.
If you can't like talk to people at that core cellular level though, hard business doesn't matter. So before you do the KPIs, before you plan the strategy, before you engage the hard tasks, sit down and mindfully talk to your team.
Yeah.
Mindfully share what's your concerns, what might be their concerns, and allow them to show up and rise in their true selves, though, and help the organization little steps at a time get over that hurdle, though. There's a great quote I love by the former CEO of IBM: let chaos reign and then rein in the chaos.
Hmm.
Chaos will continue to reign, but it's about how we can become impenetrable in an individual level, but also vis-a-vis at an organizational level.
Talk about resiliency. I think that really is a quote that hits home quite a bit. And you talked about soft business is hard business. One of the phrases that I personally do not like is when people reference soft skills. I'm still trying to find an alternative to soft skills, because I think that language suggests that dealing with people, dealing with emotions, dealing with some of those other skills that are not substantive are easy. They're soft. They're a piece of cake. And like you just said about soft business and hard business, I think developing and deploying your soft skills is one of the hardest things that can possibly happen.
It reminds me of Quiet by Susan Cain, another brilliant former attorney.
Mhm.
But when she talks about introversion versus extroversion, the best managers and leaders are introverts.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think that knowing how we're programmed today. We just are trained, hard charging, must be the leader, must be the CEO, must be the this, must be the that. But what about someone who exudes quiet self reliance or quiet introspection, and they just don't have to show? And they might not, maybe it could be, I don't have a chip on the shoulder. Maybe it could be so many other factors, though, but we don't want to keep being in the box. We talked a lot about boxes and that framing around them, but we want to be mindful of not getting so caught up in these, for the lack of the better word, stereotypes.
Yeah. No, I'm going to ask you a question. I love the fact that you raised Susan Cain. She's one of my favorite authors, and I think she does some brilliant work and did brilliant work in bringing forward the true successes and benefits of introversion and introverts in our world, especially in a North American culture where it's not necessarily seen as being beneficial. You have, and before we go to the next question, the next rule, because you talked about right now, we talked about stereotypes, we talked about leadership. We're talking about quiet and the perspective shift of extroverted versus introverted as a benefit. You have spoken with people across the globe. Your book is now in at least 3 languages, if I'm not mistaken, if not more. Um, is this applicable? Because you talked about being an internationally trained lawyer, and internationally trained lawyers come from all over the globe. Are these rules so far, the 3 that we've talked about so far, and the whole way of dealing with resilience, do you find there's a cultural difference where you go, or is it sort of a global perspective that people can say, whether you are in Canada, in the UK where you are right now, in India, in Madrid, in Greece, and wherever, that there's some common themes that people really do gravitate towards?
But that's a very interesting question on a linguistic level. If you look at the cultural differences, I learned recently that renaissance is a rebirth from French. So renaissance, a reborn. We are reborn in adversity. We're reborn in times of difficulty. We're reborn in times of stress. So to answer the question, I think it's resilience is universal. We all want to be resilient, you know, disregard adversity or overcome adversity. That is a universal thing. I think it was Carl Rogers who said, what's most personal is truly what's most universal. However, how it's applied has different examples and they show up in different stages and phases and seasons in our lives.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I never really thought about the the breakdown of the word Renaissance, and using that to describe sort of rebirth after resilience, I think is really quite incredible. Um, I've just put a note in the chat that if anybody wants to join the conversation or ask Colby a question, feel free to use the little symbol, the little uh, note to show us that you have your hand up, and then we will get to you very soon. But Colby, we've talked about 3 rules so far. One base at a time, choose your pitches, remember your rituals. Another quote that hit home, and I think I have it on page 92, and I luckily I typed it out as well because I can't see without my glasses and I didn't have them here. Um, talk about adversity. But anyhow, another quote that really hit home was when Bryce was feeling that he had to do things on his own. And a lot of us, when we feel overwhelmed, and that's, I think, why I like my call to my sister, that ritual. But when we feel like we have to do something on our own, and Spooky's comment, I loved the response that he gave to Bryce at this point. That's your ego talking again.
Mm,
We have this tendency to turn to others in good times.
mm,
That's when our personal story feels best, when our ego isn't threatened by those around us. In fact, when we need others most, when you need your team, is when trouble comes knocking, when the stakes are high and the pressure's on. You need other people in your life. Lawyers, Colby, as you know, and a number of professionals often feel like they are on their own. They have to do it on their own. They're the tough guy or girl. Tell us more about Spooky's 4th rule, which is adversity is a team sport. And I love the fact that you sort of rounded out with that.
yeah, I mean, and how we overcome adversity, how we do anything meaningful is with a team. It's with community. It's with people around us. I think so often, ego wants us to shine only in the sunlight, but it negates to the shadow. You know, we go back to Freud, the concept of the shadow self. We go, Lao Tzu, every meaningful journey starts with a single step. Embrace community once more. If you feel scared to embrace community, acknowledge that. But know that this is the way to get stuff done, to show not just to others. It's not just about like getting that star. Oh, I created a community. Woohoo! No, it's about saying this is a self-reliant system. We all need people to go to in difficult times, whether they're parents, guardians, mentors, bosses, employers, counselors, whoever they may be. they all form your resilience toolkit. They are all on your team, for lack of a better word. And this is the time when you're dealing with adversity to avail of that resource for sure.
You know what, you've reminded me there are two teams or community, and you use the word community, so I like that you use that interchangeably, that adversity can be a community sport. You talked about the internationally trained lawyers, and one of the things back in 2011, when we started the internationally trained lawyers program at U of T, where nothing existed before for ITLs. They
Mm.
were really standalones. Everybody was sort of doing it on their own until we created a program and a community. And since that time, things have exploded. Yes, it's still tough, but at least there are networks now and
Yes,
groups that you can
yes.
touch base with and go, hey, I'm feeling kind of scared about this. What do I do? Well, there's 20 other people or 30 other people who've experienced it. That was huge for so many people.
I mean, so hats off to your transformative work on behalf of the LPP.
Mhm.
Allard School at UBC. The GPLLM at U of T. I mean, these are so many transformative programs that are shaping and changing people's lives in a very qualitative way. So really, just hats off to that. One thing I would say though is I think people are still, is this right for me? Is this
Mhm.
not right for me? But go back to the fount of inner knowledge, go within and ascertain, sit down with people. Is this truly for me? Maybe, and the elephant is always in the room. Is this a cost issue? Is
Mhm.
this a visa issue? Is this issue? But do a pros and cons list and ascertain, is this truly for you?
I think asking people and sort of getting out of that, sometimes out of your comfort zone and speaking up about what's challenging you can be a huge first step. The other, and I've got to do a hats off to, and Gerline, I see your hand. Thank you. I'm going to come to you in 2 seconds. The other hats off, you mentioned George Strathy, and we mentioned this book last time as well, but there's been a new book that has been published in Ontario. I don't know if others have seen it. The Right Not to Remain Silent. And it is a book, Colby, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a book that
Oh,
a number of lawyers across types of organizations, practice areas have put together with individual stories. Oh, are you okay there?
yeah, I just charged my laptop. Sorry.
No problem. With individual stories about how they cope with mental health issues in the legal profession. And there are some profoundly personal conversations. Justice Strathy has a chapter on that as well. And so the fact that a community has come together instead of feeling isolated, instead of people feeling, oh my gosh, I'm alone with whatever this challenge that I have, whether I'm dealing with a mental health issue or loving somebody or living with someone who deals with a mental health issue, the fact that this community of really strong, successful human lawyers have put together this book for all to see, I think is really quite vulnerable and impactful at the same time. Colby, I don't know if you know that book, but definitely one to look into if you haven't seen it.
No, I definitely will do. I mean, vulnerability creates our value.
Yeah,
eh,
yeah.
7 days a week.
Yeah, no, I agree. Christina, I love the phrase that you put in there. If you want to go fast, go alone. And I can never remember who said it, but I know we've seen that and heard that multiple times. If you want to go far, go together. And that is such a truth that we need to remember at all times. Colby, if you're still okay with your charger, I'm gonna open
Yeah,
it
yeah,
up
yeah,
to
yeah.
others.
But
All
can you
righty.
can you see me okay?
We can. I love the red in the background, red or whatever that bright color
It
is.
seems like a nightclub. Sorry, I'm in my flat. I
But
don't know why this.
but it is like I don't know what time. It's pretty. Thank you, Christina. It's pretty late for you there, so thank you for
Ah,
joining
no,
us.
pleasure, pleasure.
Gerline, over to you. Join the conversation, please. Welcome from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Gina. This was a lovely session. I'm so glad to be part of this. Colby, so many insightful words that I've heard from both of you. So my question is, as you said that you are an internationally trained lawyer, being one myself, my question is that whatever you've written in your book about how do you come out of it, like all this, everything that's happening to international trained lawyers, what was your situation when you were going through that process while you transitioned? How did you come out of those miseries or adversities? Did you follow all the steps that you've written? How easy or difficult was to for you to follow?
Yeah, I mean, it was, it was definitely soul searching. That's a word I will absolutely use. I mean, I had to figure out, relying on others. There's a lot of like lawyers in my family and legally educated people in my family, but I had to figure out, what would be the best school for me. How would I, approach the NCAs? Should I do the exams themselves? Should I go to a professional school to do them? So I ended up going to Allard, UBC Allard. I did a portion of the exams there, and I did a portion of the exams online by the NCA.
Colby,
And,
one of the
and then it's the all important step to, articling. I mean, articling was the biggest thing. How can I show what the UK grades are and what the equivalents would be in Canada? I mean, see, this is the thing that I think gets a lot of people. UK is the home of the common law. If it wasn't for the UK, no other country would be doing the common law. So to say, like, we have to kind of have this, this is a phrase I've heard, and it's from my old tort law book, but there's this invidious obligation to show, this is how the criteria exactly matches. This is how this exactly matches. You know, do it, try to do your best every day, do your best, but you are more than this process, and this process will be so much better for you.
if anybody else has any questions, please put your hand up so we can acknowledge you. Colby, one of the things that you just said, as you went through the process, you wrote your book during school and then determined, if I'm not mistaken, that practicing law wasn't what you wanted to do. And I know I made that decision, God, it's over 25 years ago, but those are hard identity issues. I had a conversation earlier today with a client who has moved from the practice of law after 10 years into something else. And she says she still struggles though with that decision because there's some guilt and shame that somehow she's let herself or others down. And we talked about letting that guilt and shame go. And whenever you have other people's expectations on you, and sometimes you'll interpret those as your expectations, it can be really hard to shed them. How do you know what's right for you? And we've got people on the line who, and later on who will be watching, who may be changing their professional identities from law to something else, from something else to a new creation. How do you go about changing your identity? That can be really a source of adversity and overwhelm for many people.
I think it's a reflection that all these behaviors, all these beliefs are inculcated from somewhere. What percentage is an organic belief? Who knows? But psychology and a lot of science has shown us how formative beliefs are in the home, or beliefs in, the nascent experiences that we garner as individuals. Those actually create more of the building blocks than 50 years into a career, quote unquote. So I think it's an understanding that, if you came from an environment that stressed pressure, you will always, to some extent, feel pressurized, and the expectations might definitely seem overwhelming, and you might definitely, feel encumbered by them. You know, I was very grateful and very lucky. I don't want to use the word luck, but it was certainly more than luck, but I was raised in an environment where it was stressed, try to do your best. Try do what's right for you. Whether you choose to do this path, always have that support. But there was no sense of pressure. There was no sense of like, this must happen in this time frame, in this timeline. And I want, this is a very fascinating element of this conversation, but because I was in India, I had a speech in Goa, and if you look at, I mean, I'm very proud to be of like Indian descent, but what triggers burnout is pressure. It is unmet expectations. It is unmet needs. It is unmet self discovery. It is unmet self adventure. That's what truly triggers burnout. And if you look at, everyone has a chance, has a day to remake themselves, to burn the chain of could be discontent, to break the chain of, you know, I might not be in someone's shadow. I might not be this. I might not be that. It is okay. You have 24 hours, 365 days to break the chain. Start today.
Colby, I love that reminder. And you said something in terms of burnout, and not many people think about this. Unmet self-adventure. I got to ask you to tell us what you mean by that, because people don't think that adventure can be self-adventure can be unmet. Tell us what you mean by that. I love that quote.
I mean, just live for the new. Live for, don't be frivolous, but live for experiences that change your life. You only have one life, to use the old adage, but do things that push the envelope and do it in a way that feels right and feels whole to you. I live in London. I'm from Toronto. Toronto will always be home, but this is an adventure, and it's an adventure that I'm relishing. I'm relished, going to law school here. I'm relished, living abroad. I've relished, the people, the places, the things that have become the building blocks of my life.
I I noticed on somebody's, and I don't want to look it up now. I want to give a call out to Sarah Enor, who I had a chance to meet on Sunday, and we've been knowing each other on LinkedIn. But one of the things I realized that I had sent her a note 3 years ago, 4 years ago, because she actually puts into her profile a
What happened?
two-year, sorry?
Oh, oh,
You got us?
wait.
She puts into her profile a 2 year adventure that she took after her job in a very corporate setting where she, I think, was from her story on LinkedIn, self-diagnosed as an adult with ADHD. She took 2 years to sort of figure things out, and she calls it her intrepid adventure, if I'm not mistaken. That's sort of the title, global traveler. And then she has different things that she explored, that adventure that was really important. And I think your comment about it being unmet for some of us is really point on, right? And it takes courage to be able to actually do some of that.
Yeah, I mean, so many people, are going between one job to the next in cycles and
Hmm.
in cycles and in cycles, and it's okay to take a break. Not for too long, but just take a break and say, is this truly right for me?
Hmm.
Only you will know if it's truly right for you. But taking that time and spending that, luxury on yourself to become critical and become, self-aware, like, is this environment right for me? Am I being treated the same? I think so many people, it goes back to Maslow, um, it goes back to Freud. It goes back to so many of the great psychologists of our time. But, you know, exploring, that deep underbelly within, exploring the shadow self,
Hmm.
exploring, so many people wonder and question, am I being treated right? Am I being treated correctly? Am I being treated, and are my abilities truly allowed to shine in this environment though? But they just think, I'll just do it. And then they wonder and question, why did I make that mistake? Why did I do that to please someone? So when I talk about, self-actualization, this is a part of it. Like, is this actualization met or is it unmet?
Yeah. there's so much that you have given us through the book. I want to ask you a question, but let me just go back to the audience first. If there's any questions, I don't want to leave any hands, any comments or questions that people want to join us with. So my one question to you is resilience. Your definition of resilience, because again, it's what the book is all about. What does resilience actually mean for you? In the grand scheme of things, what is resilience for you, Colby?
The ability to take the sum of your losses and put it into your greatest gain.
I love that. Take the sum of your loss and put into your greatest gain. And last question from me, and I'd be open to other comments from you, Colby, and from others. We had 4 rules that your book gave us in the Curveball. One base at a time, choose your pitches, remember the rituals that are important, and remember that adversity is a team sport. Are any of these more important or more relevant to the process of resilience, or are you really thinking that they are all equally as important? I'm just curious when you came up with them.
I think they're all important, certainly. They are all part of the cake called resilience. They all form part of the same puzzle. They're all the same, pieces that have to be put together in equal parts, putting an equal amount of energy in putting them together.
Fantastic. No, I appreciate that. I'll ask you this curveball question. Any future curveball 2 that you've got in the works that we can, are you focusing on the curveball right now and leaving that?
Yeah, I mean, another book was certainly released called The Underdog
Okay.
last year.
Okay. Got to look
Published
at the
version last year, the one version the year before.
My apologies. I hadn't realized that was actually released. I thought it was still to be released. Tell us a little bit about what the underdog is, and then we'll wrap up soon.
So really, the underdog is about sharing that we're all underdogs, especially in this world we're in right now. An underdog is your superpower. And it's about reinventing the fact that an underdog is not just rags to riches like we've been sold so many times. No, in moments of adversity, you are an underdog. And the book is about how to deal with that. It talks about, the inner saboteur. I think for a lot of people, that are perfectionists, that stress perfection, knowing you have an inner saboteur that does sabotage success is very important to know, and it's very important to figure out how to deal with that.
Those who have worked with me know that we talk about saboteur frequently, so I'm glad that you brought up the language of saboteur, that it's not just me, that others do think of saboteur as well, Colby. I'm putting on the screen as we wrap up. If there's anybody else who's got questions, please let me know. I'm still mindful of the hands. But here is your email, colby9133@gmail.com, and your website that if people want to ask you any further questions, likewise, for me, I've got my, I thought I had it there. I've got my email and my my website as well. Colby, just a reminder for everybody who is in Ontario lawyers, please record your 1.5 hours of professionalism, because the Law Society does think that wellness and balance and resilience is important. If you're from another province, I apologize, but we've only got CPD accreditation from Ontario. I don't know if you can qualify these 90 minutes as outside of Ontario qualifications as well. Colby, what's that?
There's a will, there's a way. I'm sure.
There we go. I love that. I love that. Colby, the last sentence, or one of the last sentences that I read in your book that just hit home, really is sort of the nice summation for all of us. And you state, if you don't succeed in spite of adversity, you don't succeed in spite of adversity, you succeed because of it. And that's something that I think is really, really powerful and really important. Don't think that adversity is necessarily something you overcome. Use it as your superpower and succeed because of it. And for that, thank you very much for sharing that with us today. Any final thoughts before I remind people of next month's session? Colby, any final thoughts?
For myself, or
From you first of all. Yeah, from you first of all.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd like to leave the audience with one message as well. Sometimes you have to lose something to find everything. And it's about going deep into that loss, finding about what hurts within, finding about how you can turn it around, because a coin has two sides. So figuring out what is meaningful to you in that moment about that loss and how you can create the positives from the negatives. The other thing I'd like to add, if I may, is people can find the book on Amazon in Canada. People, if they connect with me, could find me on LinkedIn at Colby Sharma, ColbySharma. Instagram also Colby Sharma official. And also, if anyone's interested in me speaking to them on an organizational level, maybe it's coaching, maybe it's workshops, maybe it's keynote speeches, but resilience, creating a high performing culture, mastering times of deep change, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. I see people thanking us for the session, Colby. So I wanted to do that as well. Before I close, just a reminder that next month's session is Winning in Your Own Court, 10 Laws for a Successful Career Without Burning Out or Selling Out. There's a theme here, and that's by Dina Lefkowitz, and that's on August the 27th. But with that, Colby, and to everybody who is watching us live and everybody who is watching us later on, huge thank you for joining us, and keep fighting those curveballs as we all have them thrown at us. We can get through them all together. Colby, thanks so much for joining us from
Really
the UK.
appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys. Take
Take
care.
care.
All the very best
Bye,
to you.
everyone. Bye now.
Bye.